I'm Jane Applegath. This is the Epic Vision Zone where bold ideas meet extraordinary leaders. What if everything you've been told about your career timeline is untrue? And what if your uncertainty isn't a crisis, but a loud signal that you're ready for something greater? Today, we're diving into one of the most misunderstood phrases of modern life, the quarter life career crisis, and why it might just be your greatest opportunity for reinvention. Scott Doyne is a certified professional coach, a best selling author, a keynote speaker, and a former sports media executive who has spent over 30 years at the highest levels of the industry. From leadership roles at Turner Sports and Bleacher Report to partnerships with organizations like the NBA, the MLB, PGA Tour, and NASCAR, he has seen firsthand what it takes to build, pivot, and sustain a meaningful career. But what makes Doyne's work so compelling is this: he's experienced the reinvention himself. His latest book, Navigating the Quarter Life Career Crisis, delivers research backed strategies to help emerging and executive leaders break free from fear to failure, timeline anxiety, and the trap of comparison while stepping themselves into clarity, confidence, and aligned success. Today, working with organizations like Partners in Change, 21st Century Leaders, the University of Michigan, and Emory University, he's guiding the next generation of leaders to navigate change with intention and power. And when he's not transforming careers, he's at home with his wife, two children, and their Instagram famous golden doodle. Welcome, Scott. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks, Jane. It's great to see you again.
Likewise, I'm really curious about your golden doodle, but we'll get into that later for sure. Well, Scott and I were just talking briefly before we got started here, and this is a topic that personally I had no idea was at the top of many young people. So let's delve into it and get this unpacked. The quarter life crisis. In your words, what is the definition of the quarter life crisis that is affecting 75 to 86% of young adults? And what if it's a quarter life awakening? What are we getting wrong about this phrase?
I like that part about the awakening because I think it's true. The group that I studied was 18 to 25, and it's generally considered Gen Z right now, and they're really just stressed out. And part of my epiphany of writing the book was that I wanted to understand what was going on, what was so different, why is their experience maybe more stressful than previous generations. So that's where the research started. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that exacerbated stress, including, of course, AI, and everybody has, fear of the unknown. But there's also how they grew up with social media, virtual media, and the age they were during the pandemic. Those were a lot of the things that I think created this perfect storm of sorts, running into a difficult job market, but also their lived life and the platforms they consume, really making it feel like a true crisis.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. I actually, when you look at it, there was so much disruption in their coming to adulthood, so to speak. Much more than say you and I would have experienced. But yeah, there was, and then of course it was the unknown because we had never dealt with a pandemic like that before in our generation or their generation. And of course, and then there was, the shutdown, and then now we've got AI and a job market that's changing by the week. So yeah, I could see where all those triggers would create stress and depression and a lot of these words that personally I never even spoke about till I was much older in my life. I'm like, speak to young people and they go, I'm so depressed. And I'm going, my gosh, why? But it makes sense. Disruption is very, very powerful, and especially when it is in the negative. Well, what was the inspiration? Now, you told us about the research you did. What really inspired you to author this new book?
Well, in what we talked about last year was my first book, which was my own midlife career crisis. And as I was writing that, I found myself looking back at my quarter life and what was going on then and what was that for me. And I actually thought this book would be autobiographical, but once I started talking to students of this generation, I realized, what I grew up with was nothing, no sort of challenge compared to what they're going through now. And I see it in students that I teach at Emory. I see it in my coachees, my mentees, and even my children who are 20 and 22 currently. So seeing that upfront and personal and hearing the stories and beginning to talk about it, I just wanted to understand it better. So that was really the driver, is let me do the research and understand it. Once I've done that research, then if I ask them what sort of solutions they're looking for, I can maybe find some of those solutions and present them in a way that they can digest and not just be helped by my generation, but help each other through a difficult
Mm.
period of life.
Yes, absolutely. That is so profound what you just said. Help each other. Because when we speak with our peers, we get feedback from them, and then you realize, oh, I'm not alone in feeling what I'm feeling or going through what I'm going through, because that makes you feel like, oh, there's not something wrong with me. It's something that's in everybody, and just people aren't talking about it. So that's wonderful that you get them to just open up. That's a huge leap forward. Well, tell us about the book. You just mentioned that it was a curiosity and what you feel, and of course with your kids. But how different is it from other books in this category?
I think addressing the stress head on is different. There's a lot of books that give you interview tips or how to build your resume or even how to build skills in the age of AI. And they're all phenomenal books, but none of them went as far as I think I went in terms of acknowledging and validating the stress, providing quotes from Gen Z in terms of how they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. And then the research into what solutions they're interested in. That's proprietary new research. And so that, as well as the collection of resources available to them, books and organizations ready to support Gen Z in the ways they're asking for it. I think it's that combination of the acknowledgement of stress, the research itself, and the insights that come from that lead to tailored solutions from existing books and organizations.
Mm. So it would, for me, it sounds like there's a guide in there. So it's providing that insight, but then you've got given them a reference to, this is where you can go for this, or maybe take a look at this book, or so on and so forth. Yeah, that's wonderful. So it becomes a tool, not just a read for knowledge. Well, interestingly, what did you learn that surprised you the most about the research that you did? Because I would think you'd probably come up with something that kind of shocked you.
The the pervasiveness really did shock me,
Mm.
as well as the vulnerability. You mentioned earlier talking about mental health was not something that was maybe as normalized, when we were growing up. And this generation has some vocabulary for that. It's less stigmatized, not completely, but I asked a question in the survey to provide an example of a stressful situation they've been in related to their career, and some of what they told me about, really broke my heart. And I've seen some of this in person as well in some of the interviews where they talk about, not getting into a certain school, not being on a certain timeline, not getting
Mm.
that job or internship they really wanted, or getting it and then being terribly disappointed in what it was actually like. And so all of that,
Mm.
to me, I really felt it, and that's why I provide a lot of quotes in the book so that people can understand, like you said, they're not alone. This stress exists, And once I've established that, the book isn't a total downer, we get into solutions pretty fast in terms of the areas that they were really looking for support.
Yes, that's so important. But I could see that I do realize that the young people are much more open with their feelings, so to speak, and they do tend to air them more than say you or I would have at that age, because maybe number one we didn't experience it, but number two it was just you just didn't do that. I mean, I don't know about in your era, but in our era, it was like, well, you keep your feelings to yourself. Kind of like if you break down in the middle of work, it would be like, whoa, what's going on? But yeah, that's really a shame. And what I felt from what you just shared with us is that I feel like they're trying to climb a ladder that's not true to their heart. They're trying to prove themselves for the beliefs of others and the culture, possibly, and society. And that is such a bad trap to get into. And at such a young age.
It is. There's a interesting section of the book I call "Bad News, Good News," and
Mm,
one of the chapters is about family, and this is something that came out, which is family. It can be a phenomenal stress reliever. People you rely on, people you can talk to, but it can also be a stressor for people, and that might even be the same person, different family members or different days in terms of how those expectations might feel or the timeline that they feel like they're supposed to be on. And social media
mhm.
plays into this as well because you're seeing what others are accomplishing, or at least what they say they're accomplishing, and trying to live up to that standard that might be fictitious.
Right. And it's not really who they are. I mean, yeah, and therein lies the stress, right?
Mhm.
Because you're on a hamster wheel at a very young age and trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. But yeah, that's not healthy. I see it in my niece. She's like a workaholic and she's 21 years old. And I'm like, you can calm down a little bit. It's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of life in front of you. But she's like, no, she's self-employed. She's going to university. She's taking so many classes all at once. It's just like, whoa, but yeah, and I could see that that's the trap that she's fallen into, is that she has to have these ladders or these levels that she has to, accomplish at a very young age. And you're right, social media does play a big part in that as well, because they see their friends doing things. But yeah, kudos to you for taking this on, Scott. Oh my gosh, I could see you going to universities with this and just making speeches, because this is something that's so needed for the Gen Z. Well, you've worked with high level brands like the NBA and Bleacher Report. So, what's the biggest lie that high performers believe about their career success?
I'm going to cut through that one with a sharp knife first. It's not a meritocracy, and that may be something that you think if you work hard and you do the right things and you perform, that's the only path to success is that performance. But there's a lot more to it, and functional skills I think historically have been that answer. But with the change that's going on in the economy and different industries, I think other skills are more valuable, like adaptability and resilience. So I think,
Mhm.
that path that maybe a lot of us were on, where you study a certain thing, get a major, get a job, so much of that is now self guided. And the world around everybody is changing so quickly. We're all dealing with this. And so, if you
Mhm.
can be a continuous learner, if you can adapt, and if you can recover from setbacks, I think if we can teach our young people those skills, then they'll be able to help themselves long into the future.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that key word that you just shared, resilience, that is so important today, and the meaning behind that. So, and the tools that one can use to, it's the fear of failure as well, but I had one guest who said, failure is fertilizer. So we always learn from it if we apply it in a way that we could stand back from it and say, okay, what can I learn from it as opposed to, oh, it's my fault. But yeah, that all plays into resilience. And yeah, I could see that. Well, career shifts, what are the signs that it's time for a career shift? If you're taught, I don't know if you covered this in the chapter, but say you're a Gen Zer and, what would you say to them if they're having some issues and you say maybe now it's time for a career shift?
Sure. For the younger ones, we discussed shifts in majors because I think that's the beginning of it, right? They make their
Mm,
decision about where they're going to college. They're making a decision about majors. They're making a decision about where to apply. It's a lot of decisions, big decisions in quick succession. When maybe when they got to 18, they hadn't made any big decisions on their own, and so that sort of pattern is very difficult. But I think the way I think about the shifting is the stress that comes as part of that process is something that leads to a reality check. So there's a chapter of the book called
mm,
Reality Check. It's really for the young professionals that have entered the workforce and it isn't what they thought it would be, or through internships they discover something that's more purposeful or something they're passionate about, and that just comes with time. There's a book I reference in my book called Squiggly Careers, and it's one of my favorites that I discovered, and it just points it out so clearly that this career path is not a straight line. It doesn't have to be a straight line. You don't need to know what you're going to do the rest of your life when you're 18 years old. Somehow society has provided that expectation, or at least they believe that's what they need to figure out. And in some cases, med school, nursing, law school to some degree, right? There are paths that are a little more commitment oriented. But even with those, I found a data point on lawyers that are, only 41% are practicing law 10 years out of law school. So there are
wow.
changes that will happen, and some of those can be by choice when you discover something that gives you more joy.
Mm. And the fact that you say that it's okay, that's
It's
the big
okay.
thing, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay. You
Permission.
can
Yeah.
change.
The permission
Yes, permission.
important.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so important, permission, because yes, we think that once we've chosen, that's it. And if we go off or we change it, then it's like we're a failure. There's that word again. That's like
Yeah.
that's yeah, but it's the permission to change your mind and to explore who you are, because you're right, at 18 it's like I didn't know. I was just like, okay, now what? And when I asked my niece, I felt bad because I know how that feels, and she's in majoring in business, but that's a very broad topic.
Mhm.
And I'm always saying, well, what is it do you like about business? Everything. I'm like, okay, the money, you know. All right, but yeah, anyway, so I get it. It's a tough decision at a very early age, and you're going to change your mind all the way through your 20s and 30s. And if you do, that's okay. It's permission to do it. Yeah, I love
Even
that.
at 50, I
Ye-
changed drastically when I turned 50, and I'm thankful for it.
Scott, I'm with you. I've changed careers so many times. This came to me during COVID, the podcasting. So, and I'm no young chicken. So, it changes all the time. And you know what? I think that makes for a very rounded individual, because you got to go with the flow, or like you said, resilience. That's it. Because
Yeah.
look at all the new AI jobs that are coming out that never existed, not even 3 years ago. So, who would have thought that they'd want to be an AI expert? Well, the compassion trap. Let's talk about that. That's you say that's the silent confidence killer. So, how is it shaping career decisions in ways that people don't even realize?
Yeah, one of my interviewees quoted this to me, which is comparison is the thief of joy. And
Mm,
I think there's a lot to that, which is looking at LinkedIn, seeing on social media what other people are doing and trying to keep up or catch up when it's not even your race. And
mhm.
perception has become more important to them. They even understand that they're a brand and they're putting content about themselves and they're curating that. So they've grown up very different than before those innovations. But the comparison can keep you going with anxiety forever if you're always trying to
Hmm.
keep up and it's never enough, never enough, never enough. There's a friend of mine wrote a book called Unworried, and in it talks about contentment and that contentment
Hmm.
is actually okay. And at least for me, I know I've gone in different cycles with where I've been and what I've been doing, and ambition comes and goes. And I remember going to one of my mentors and saying, at one point I was sort of okay with where I was at. And he said, "Congrats, Scott, you're growing up." And so I think some of that it comes with maturity, but at those early ages, you haven't quite experienced that comfort with contentment that is
Hmm.
okay to not stop and not maybe pause, but relax for a second and not drive yourself to that anxiety end.
Yeah, there's definitely, there is a lesson in contentment too, because our world doesn't lend itself to that particular emotion, because we're always on the go. We're always striving for more. And like you said, social media always shows the pretty pictures and the great achievements and the this and the that, and people are going on luxurious vacations. So, you know, yeah, that's a practice. Contentment is definitely a practice. I think it's finding out who you are, because even at our
Yeah.
ages, you ask people, what do you really want to do? Or who are you? And that's a huge question. People
Yeah.
are like, what do you mean? Who am I? And they tell, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
That's a
it's,
big
it's,
question.
yeah,
I
it,
prefer
it,
what do you, I prefer what might you want to try next. I think trial, exploration, experimentation is part of the answer.
oh yeah, that's perfect. Absolutely. Well, like you just mentioned, that you've navigated your own career reinvention. And what was the moment that you realized your next chapter required a completely different version of you?
It was an emotional change. I think some of it, in retrospect, there were symptoms, but when it
Mm,
really hit me, and this was my midlife crisis, was when I just wasn't getting as much joy out of the parts of my job that got me into the sports industry. I was getting a lot of fulfillment from managing my team, investing in their professional development, and seeing them grow. And so that, along with industry turmoil, led me to a coaching session of my own where I was with an executive coach for the first time and sat in that session. I was a little more open minded than I had been about my future options. And I looked across that screen and thought to myself, I think that might be it. And this was
mm,
coming out of the pandemic as well, right? A lot of that introspection and purpose and legacy and those big thoughts. And I really just tapped into that feeling I had of working with my team and helping people. I didn't want to get laid off at the time, but I was more prepared when I did because I was
mm,
trying out this coaching thing and not one foot out, but in some spare time, putting some thoughts together about what might I try if that did
mhm.
happen. And it turns out that it's truly been my calling.
Mm. It's funny how the universe taps us or pushes us on our face in some ways to make
I
us
agree.
see where our gifts lie. Because yeah, the pandemic was an awakening, I think, for many people. We
Mhm.
we get caught on the job and the home and the kids and all that, and you just completely lose yourself. But when we had that chance to pause, a lot of people were lost, maybe even yourself as well. But then you sit down and go, okay, what can I do? where do we go from here? What, like you just said, what can I try next? Yeah, but it's that pause that really gave us the space. You know,
That's
it's
right.
so
Slowing
important.
down. Mhm.
Yeah, slowing down. And that's like we were talking about Gen Z slowing down. That's one thing I think would be very valuable to all of them, is to learn and to practice how to slow down. And speaking of Gen Z, well, what resources are Gen Z professionals looking for then today? What did you find?
Yeah, I can't wait to share this. It was super clear that the top three really stood out. One is financial support. Anytime I asked
Mm,
about stress, finances came up. It was very real. There's a lot of data about what's going on with housing costs and rental costs compared to
mm,
entry level income. So that's definitely part of it. But the other two are something I think we can all do something about, which is supporting them with mentors and supporting them in networking. And so
mm,
I really appreciated the honesty there, that that's something they want more of, but also admitted they didn't know how to go about it. And so that's where my
mm,
challenge really came in, is okay, now, this happened in the discussions. It came through the data really clearly. These are the areas where they want support. Now, how do we help them?
mm. So, do you have any plans?
I do. I absolutely do. This is something I'm very passionate about, both areas. For
Okay.
networking, I have my own methodology I use in coaching, and I put it in the book. It's in there if people want to understand that methodology. It's called ICAN, ICAN. Each letter stands for something. I'm not going to give it all away. But I also talked to some professionals in the mentoring and networking spaces and asked them, college career office leaders, a couple women that run nonprofits and provide support in mentoring for young professionals. And some of it is really more in the nomenclature. Mentoring feels like this really formal relationship to young professionals that they're supposed to set up and almost have like a contract. And one of the executives, Parul Khosla, who's the CEO of Arena Talent, she said it can be very informal. And as I look back at even where my kids started to understand mentors, it was actually in college applications when they had to get reference letters, because there
Mm,
is some level of familiarity of people in your life that are willing to say nice things about you. It could be an internship boss, it could be the advisor for your club, it could be professors. And so there's some familiarity of that age group of that type of support. And so connecting those dots in terms of that's what a mentor is. It doesn't have to be a formal relationship, but you can informally ask for advice from time to time. And those might be people that you want to either follow in their footsteps or just let them help you through difficult decisions. So that's the mentoring
mm,
side of it. Networking, within my publishing group, there's a guy that wrote a book called The Connector's Compass, Joe
mm,
Kaufman, and he does a phenomenal job of breaking it down where it's not a transactional relationship. It's really about building a genuine relationship. And to me, I call it networking as a research project, where if a young
mm,
person isn't sure what they want to do, or maybe is, they can identify people they can learn from. And if you go about it that way, asking questions, being curious, then that's a relationship that can begin to form that isn't, hey, will you help me get that job? That might come
mm.
later, but it can begin much slower and much more genuinely and authentically, which I think plays into the integrity that they prefer to work with.
Mm. Yes, that's so important, and so that giving them that not just a challenge, but giving them the confidence to take that step, because it's really interesting. I mean, nowadays it's very difficult in the sense that if you send an email, it gets lost. So there has to be a way to connect with those people that you want to say get in touch with. But it was interesting because when I was way back during the pandemic, I was working on the podcast and reaching out on LinkedIn for guests. And LinkedIn is a great platform for that, for the young people too, because I find that LinkedIn, they get back to you people will more likely read that, and if they're reaching out as a young person saying they love this industry. But what the point I'm getting to is it's the composition of the words and the way that you approach them, because I've always been someone that really values words, and putting that little piece of greeting together and that invitation to, I'd love your thoughts, I'd honor your opinion, da 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 da. It really is something. Then when you get a response, because they feel you, it makes you feel so like you've made it. Like, you've worked in sports. It's a win. It's like, even if you don't necessarily connect with them for the rest of your lives, but getting that connection and knowing that they did it themselves, I think that's one of the biggest things, and it follows you through life. I used to be
Yeah.
in sales, so I understand that. I mean, I when I was in my previous life, I was in the financial industry. So, that was back when you just used the phone to contact people. There was no internet. But, it's like, yeah, that is a fabulous way for those people, for those young people, to start to gain their confidence and start to understand what an industry looks like, but also to connect with those people that they might want to be working for. And of course, if they don't get
Exactly.
back to you, then that's a sign too,
Yeah,
right?
and it's okay. We're not gonna
Yeah.
expect a perfect batting average on that, and sometimes that's where it can be painful for the young folks, is they finally get the courage up to try and send one message and don't get a response, and then never wanna do it again, and, you gotta put up some numbers and adjust
Yeah.
your expectations, adjust that definition of success so that, you can celebrate those little wins, and those add up absolutely over the course of your life.
Yeah. I love that. You said just keep a number, maybe have 10 names, and you got to go through all of them and you celebrate the wins. Absolutely. Well, what can parents do then for their Gen Z children to help them in their career journey?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and I really don't love generalizing. So forgive me if it sounds like this doesn't apply to you. But I think a lot of parents just really care and don't quite know how to go about it. And I was probably this way as well, and maybe still am if you ask my children some days. But I think it begins with asking questions. And
Mm,
this is something I've learned even more through the practice of coaching, which is not about telling people what to do or even making suggestions, but helping them find their own answers. And so being
mm,
inquisitive, helping them think through, a lot of these parents went through the process of helping their children decide on a college. And some of those might have been more influential than others. But the way I've seen it work is, if it is their decision and they get to a point where they're struggling, they have to find their way through that struggle. And I think that's an
mm,
important part of empowerment. Um, but it is difficult because we don't want to see our kids struggle. That's not enjoyable. But at the
mm,
same time, even with us, our greatest growth does come through challenge. And so if they have challenge, if they fall down and they learn how to get back up, it's actually better that way. I would never advise anybody to put their child in harm's way intentionally, but asking questions, listening, empowering. I think that's where a lot of the fruit is. But I also know there's different dynamics in different families, which I fully respect.
yes. No, I think that's wonderful. Being definitely open minded, but letting them come to the answers or realize
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
think about the last thing we talked about with mentoring. If you can help your child find mentors, that maybe they find more psychological safety talking to that person confidentially, or have them find a coach, which I think, a lot of young people do that for their college choice. Maybe there's a relationship they can have that isn't necessarily you as a parent, which takes a tremendous amount of trust. So when
Right.
parents send me their kids for career coaching, I'm so flattered, because it's such an important relationship where you're helping their child make difficult career decisions. It's still the child's choice, but it's a private relationship. So I think capitalizing on the data and insights about them wanting mentors is a little bit of a hint that the parents don't have to be the only mentor.
Right. Yes. And in fact, sometimes it's better if they're not, because there could be
Right,
underlying static.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe some conversations are for Aunt Jane.
Yeah. Right. You never know. Yes, but absolutely no, I could see that. I mean, when I was younger, I would not, I would prefer to have a stranger, or a coach or whatever. Didn't exist when I was young, but to discuss those things, rather than my parent, because they have certain expectations. They have their own
Yeah,
thing and what they're looking for.
yeah.
Yeah. And but that's wonderful. I love that idea. Well, what can managers do then of Gen Z employees, and do they motivate them in their role?
So part of this answer is the same as parents, which is ask questions and listen. I just believe in empathy. I believe in empowerment. Even when I was managing my team members, having a conversation about their professional goals more broadly. Yes, there's going to be goals related to your tasks that you have to accomplish in your job, as the job description was written. But when we're talking about industries where things are changing so fast, and even as managers and leaders, we're not sure where things are going. If those employees have a passion project or an area they want to get better at or learn about, who's saying that that area isn't ripe for growth? And so if you
Mm,
listen and let them work in that space, they'll be more motivated, they'll work harder, and it might be the answer to your question because they are more in touch with younger consumers anyways. So I think there's a
yeah.
lot of room there to operate. All managers might not agree with me, but I think when you think about this generation and the desire they have to make an impact and have some balance, I think there's room there to let them experiment that might benefit everybody.
Hmm. Yes, and hopefully you have a manager with an open mind, because absolutely that makes a huge difference. Yeah, they have to be that type that can see the potential, but then gives them the reins to explore, or like you said, open it up to what can we do better. Let's work as a team here, as a like you said, questions, ask questions.
Mhm.
It's yeah, it takes an entire revamping, I think, of the roles of not only, well, leaders, basically. Yeah, I always say it,
Yeah.
leadership is not just a behavior, it's also a frequency, and it's what energy you bring. Because those that, in neuroscience has proven that we have, where humans are wired for reciprocity. But when you give someone value, they don't just discard it, or it doesn't disappear. It circulates and it goes around. So yeah, I mean, that's something that's just so powerful for today. And speaking of that, with the world being so obsessed with speed
Mhm.
and timelines, how do we help clients then trust that their own pace, with that their own pace is fine, without feeling that they're falling behind?
I had one quote from an interviewee where they said, "We are the most overconnected and disconnected generation." And I
Mhm.
thought that was fantastically interesting. Just thinking about that dichotomy because they get stress from trying to keep up with the Joneses, like we talked about. But if they can compare themselves to their real friends or classmates or people in their own circle, like the actual people, they'll see that everybody else is in the same place. We're all struggling in some way. We're all having to pivot. We're all trying to learn new skills, and so that can still seem competitive, but I think some relief comes with that acknowledgement versus believing that the scroll is real and falling into that
Mm,
trap and staying on LinkedIn and getting into the rabbit hole too deep, where you just sort of forget, even at their age where they've grown up with social media and they know a lot of what people are putting out there is not real. or at least exaggerated, or their best selves. They know it, but they still forget. And so I think
Yeah.
that's where, having other people to talk to, having mentors, even the networking where you can get reminded from time to time. And we talked about mental health. This group talked about going to therapy. And so, rip the Band-Aid off of that conversation, and a lot of people get some value from that. I think anything outside of isolation, that's really where, the stuff spins in your head and you end up at that spiral. But I just hope they take a deep breath. They trust in real people, not the avatars that are out there, and just take one step in any direction.
Yeah. They need a lot of help, Scott. You really got your job cut out for you. For
Yeah, and
sure.
if we can all reduce the friction on the willingness to ask for help, that first ask is probably the toughest thing, because there's some pride there. There's some cultural differences. There's people that have been brought up that asking for help is a weakness, or you can even get punished by asking for help. Like, I respect that that's some of the background there. So if you can do anything, any of us, to, when somebody reaches out and asks how you're doing, they might actually be asking because they want you to ask them how they're doing. It might not be
Mm,
what they said, but they might be implying that they want to be checked in on. And so I think all of us
mm,
can be a little more kind and aware of that in reaching out to our people, or even strangers, that aren't sure how to ask for help, but we can be there to provide it.
mm. I love that. That is pure gold. Yeah. The kindness, because that often happens, and just in passing with individuals. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, thank you for that, Scott. So, for someone listening right now who feels really stuck in, the world and everything that's happening today, and they're uncertain and maybe they're feeling overwhelmed, what's the one truth that you want them to walk away with that could change the trajectory of their entire life?
I'm going to start super basic. The first step is a deep breath. And I really
Mm,
believe in this. And it's why I address the stress part so heavily in the book, which is, if you're in stress mode, one interviewee said, there's not just fight or flight, there's fight, or freeze. When things get
mm,
overwhelming, they said their brain just stops. And so then you're not moving at all. And so that can't be, the way to go. So if you take that deep breath and try to get yourself out of stress mode, then you can start to experiment and explore. That leads to hypotheses, and it leads to trial. And one of those things you try, if you like it, just keep going. And if you don't, try something else.
right. Yeah. So important to breathe. Yeah. And there's the breaths, that there's all kinds of box breathing, but it's just 4 breaths in and 6 breaths out, because the if you exhale longer than you inhale, apparently it taps into the sympathetic nervous system,
Yeah.
or the
It gets you out of
parasympathetic.
your
Yeah.
head. I literally did it this morning. I do it most mornings. And
Yeah.
there's a chapter on religion, faith, and spirituality that talks about meditation as well, and not judging anybody's approach to any of those things. But there are some options in terms of how to go about that. And I share my meditation practice, which is extremely informal. It's 5 to 10 minutes in the morning when I'm walking my dog.
Mm, wonderful. Yeah, meditation doesn't have to be sitting on a couch. I tell people that, excuse me, sitting on a cushion.
Right.
It can be a walk. It could be a run. It's whatever, brings you, like you said, get out of your head
Hmm.
and get into your body and your heart, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing. That's a wonderful chapter. It sounds like just a beautiful book. Well, that being said, how does this book fit into your career coaching business? You kind of tapped on it a little bit with maybe some of the parents reaching out, but give us a little more insight.
Yeah, what I really love, one of the things about writing a book is it helps me put structure around thoughts. In this case, I got so much great research out of it that when I am helping young people, I know better about how to show up and what they're looking for and how they think even a little bit. And so I think that helps with Gen Z, but also with parents. I do some volunteer coaching for an organization called Partners in Change, where I do a little more life coaching with adults and helping adults through situations where maybe they have kids this age. Just understanding and having that empathy, not providing exact structured advice, but just being in the mindset of people a little bit more, I think has always helped me be a better coach.
Yes. Yeah. That's great. I love that. Spreading the good around. That's what we need for sure. Well, what is next then? What are you working on? What are you working on?
So you actually guessed earlier correctly. I am on a college book tour, and so I'm about halfway through what's scheduled so far, which is 23 events in 9 states, and I am loving getting in front of young people, seeing their visceral reaction to the acknowledgement of the stress, and then hearing from them in person what they're looking for, and then we typically go through exercises like the networking exercise or a job search strategy methodology that I have. So it's really great to get out there in public and see the young people. And I really hope to do more of that, through the end of this school year and even into the fall.
Well, congratulations on that. That is fantastic. I mean, that is the audience that you need to get in front of with this book. It is so, this is its time. Your timing is absolutely perfect for this kind of information, and I think I see it growing. I see a second edition, frankly, because this is
Okay.
something that is evolving definitely in the world, and it's going to change, and it is changing. But this is wonderful. I was even going to say, maybe think of a book club where you that could be
Yeah,
virtual. Everybody
yeah.
reads the book and you go through chapter by chapter, because it sounds like to me, I have not seen read the book, but it feels like there is so much goodness in there that you could discuss with those who've read it. And boy, would you
Yeah, the
get so much
discussions
out
are
of that.
valuable. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. I really think that the discussions, even amongst the generation,
Yeah.
they really will feel that support.
Yeah, yeah, and then you could tap into many, many schools. The tour is fabulous, but that would give you the opportunity to go wide with virtual, because you could just do it on Zoom. Yeah,
Well, I
that'd be
appreciate the
so cool.
consulting. I got a lot of
Yeah,
value out of this.
yeah, no problem. I mean, it popped into my mind when you were discussing the book. I was like, wow, this would be a great book club discussion. And then from there, you know, the different coaching opportunities that you could provide for these young people, and even have the parents, they can drop in too. So yeah, I it's just it makes me excited. I think it's a great opportunity. So yeah. Well, that being said, Scott, how can someone contact you for support and speaking engagements?
So I do still live on LinkedIn. I'm there all the time, so people can follow me, find me. I have a newsletter there now, or scottdoyne.com.
Okay, wonderful. And again, because we are here on the Epic Vision Zone, if your life were an epic story, what would the title be?
I would like to think it would be I see the best in you.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. I love that. That makes total sense. Well, thank you again, Scott, for joining us here today and reminding us that the moment you stop measuring your life against someone else's timeline is the moment that your real life begins. And once again, for information and to connect with Scott, go to the Epic Vision Zone bio pages, where you will find all of his social media information, direct contact information, and his book links. And be sure to follow me on Instagram at Jane Applegath. Look me up at janeapplegath.com and like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Epic Vision Zone. Sending you much love and gratitude. Until next time, stay visionary, lead with love, stay epic.